to this topic, and then I have a question for you.
All
Uh,
right. Or should I read from the book first?
what do you feel like doing?
Well, first we want to hear from you, and then why don't I read some of the book?
Okay, all right. I have to say, I love the book. And as I said to Tom, and I don't say this to men about many books, it actually soothes me. It makes me feel good. Because this is, we're talking about a lot of my people. My father was a copper miner in Butte, Montana when I was born. My mother cleaned boarding houses. And they were like intellectuals. They read, they discussed. They had friends who read and discussed things with them. So it was a shock to get to college and find that I was actually from a lower class than most of my classmates in college. That they were not impressed that my grandfather had, ridden the rails across the country to get to Montana. They were not, it just didn't mean anything to them. Whereas I thought it was a great achievement. So my question is, what brings you to populism? You went to good schools. Well, I ended up going to some very good schools myself, but you have all the credentials to be an anti-populist.
I know. It is. I think about this all the time, Barbara, and I think the answer is really long and winding, but it well, listen, why don't I read from the book first so that I get myself all worked up, okay? And then we'll go into that, okay? That's a really, really good question. And I'm going to tell you the whole story about, growing up in Kansas and how I discovered populism and how I came to decide that, how I became a liberal. I used to be a little Republican right here in this very house where I'm sitting right now. I was upstairs digging in the attic yesterday and I found a Barry Goldwater matchbook, that we found at one of our, because this area where my dad lives is very Republican, or was. I mean, it's one of these areas that it's changing. It's becoming more of the sort of the new Democrats have sort of tickled it, and they're slowly but surely flipping over. But let me read from the book, okay? It's what I've been working on for the last 2 years, and then we'll come back to that excellent question, okay? All right, so I'm going to jump around a little bit from the very first part of the book, and I hope that you guys can follow me, okay? So here it goes. Now, this is all new for me. I've never done a book talk like this before. I usually read off of a piece of paper, standing at a podium and all that sort of thing. I've never done this. Barbara, if I sound like an idiot, would you please stop me?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Just a few short years ago, we Americans knew what we were doing in the world. We were going to make the planet into one big likeness of ourselves. We had the experts. We knew how it was done. Our policy operatives would de-radicalize here and regime change there. Our economists would float billions to the good guys and slap sanctions on the bad. And pretty soon the whole world was going to be stately and neat, safe for debt instruments and empowerment seminars, for hors d'oeuvres in the embassy garden and taxis we hailed with smartphones. Democracy, of thee we sang. Now we stand chastened, humiliated, bewildered. Democracy. We tremble to think of what it might do next. Or so goes the wail, anyways, of the American leadership class as they endure another year of panic over where our system is dragging them. The people, they say, are out of control. Populism is the word that comes to the lips of the respectable and the highly educated when they perceive the global system going haywire like this. Populism for them is a one-word evocation of the logic of the mob. It is the people as a great rampaging beast. What has happened, the thinkers of Beltway and C-suite tell us, is that the common folk have declared independence from experts and along the way from reality itself. And so they, the learned, have come together to rescue civilization. Political scientists, journalists, policy advisors, economists, technologists, CEOs, joining as one to save our social order, to save it from populism. The imagined struggle of expert versus populist has a fundamental, almost a biblical flavor to it. It's a battle of order against chaos, education against ignorance, mind against appetite, enlightenment against bigotry, culture against barbarism. And from TED Talk and red carpet, the call rings forth. Democracy must be controlled before it ruins our democratic way of life. Now, in attacking populism, the object is not merely to resist President Donald Trump, the nation's thinkers say. No, today's political face-off pits the center against the periphery, the consensus against the disgruntled sorehead. And in this conflict, the side of right is supposed to be obvious. Ordinary people are upset, everyone knows this. But the ones whose well-being must concern us most are the elites, whom the people threaten to topple. If the people have lost faith in the ones in charge, it can only be because something has gone wrong with the people themselves. As a writer for The Atlantic put it in the summer of 2016, our most pressing political problem today is that the country abandoned the establishment, not the other way around. An article in Foreign Policy that same year expressed it more archly. It's time for the elites to rise up against the ignorant masses. Sober citizens worried about populism at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Scholarly types moaned about it at the annual Prague Populism Conference. High net worth individuals reviled it at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. The cool kids deplored it on the plains of Texas at South by Southwest. At Stanford University, the Global Populisms Project, which is co-chaired by a prominent former member of the Obama administration, declared as follows on their website: populist parties are a threat to liberal democracy. Populism works, these authorities assure us, by putting the common man on a pedestal, by promising him the strong leaders he craves, and then by assaulting the intellectuals and the multiculturalism he hates. When populism gets in power, it ignores norms and science. Populism is simply the ism that stands for mob rule, a headlong collapse into the tyranny of the majority that our founding fathers so dreaded. Now, Barbara, as you probably know, I am very much in favor of analyzing and understanding and defeating the sort of great right-wing turn of the last 30, 40 years. That is the project of my life. It's the project that I think is completely and totally legitimate. But I have to ask, why must we call this stuff populism? And that's the first question that I pose in this new book of mine. Now, as you know, populism was once something real. It was not a, made up political science concept. It was spelled with a capital P, and it referred to something specific. The word was an American invention. In fact, it was invented about 20 miles from where I'm sitting right now in Kansas City. And the group that it referred to, the Populist Party, was one of America's first great economic political uprisings. This was one of the largest mass movements in our history, in which millions of ordinary farmers and a lot of labor union members, rank and file Americans from all different walks of life, learned to think of the country's economic system as a thing that they might change by common effort. Populism was also this country's final serious third-party effort. Its innovation back in 1891 was to make an appeal based on class solidarity rather than what the two main parties were doing at the time. They tried to bring together farmers in the South and the West with factory workers in the northern cities. The interests of rural and civic labor are the same, proclaimed its famous founding statement. Their enemies are identical. And what the populists meant by their enemies were those who prospered while producing nothing. Bankers, railroad barons, commodity traders, that sort of thing, along with their hirelings, meaning corrupt politicians who served wealth instead of the people. Now, the Populist Party died out within a decade, but the philosophy that the populists embodied did not die. It goes on. This idea of working people from all different walks of life coming together against economic privilege lives on. You might say it's one of the main streams of our democratic tradition. And one of the themes in this new book of mine, The People Know, is to trace the development of this genuine populist idea over the decades, in the 1930s, in the 1960s, right up to the present. Anyhow, that's the word's historic meaning. And when we use the word populist as a handy term for demagogues and bigots and would-be dictators, we are inverting that historic definition. Populism in its original formulation was profoundly democratic. It was a movement that by the standards of the day was anti-demagogic, that was pro-enlightenment and pro-science and pro-equality. In its heyday of the 1890s and alone among the major political parties back then, populism stood for human rights. The Populist Party had prominent women leaders. Populists despised tyrants and they fought against imperialism. Populism defied the poisonous idea of white solidarity. Now, scholars and pundits and whoever of our own time have a perfect right to ignore all of that and to, just get rid of it and divorce any word they choose from its original meaning. You are allowed to do that in our society. It is legitimate to define populist just however you please. But let me ask you this. Why would someone do that? Why would someone use such a fine democratic word to mean racist, to mean dictator, to mean anti-intellectual? Now, the answer that I've come up with and that I propose in The People Know, this is my innovation, by the way, is that denunciations of populism like the ones that we are hearing all around us today. I'm sure if I did a search of the Washington Post or the New York Times today, I would see the word populism used in exactly this way. That this usage is part of a long tradition of pessimism about popular sovereignty and democratic participation. And the name I give to that pessimistic tradition is anti-populism. And that's what The People Know is all about. It's a history of anti-populism. And when you investigate the long history of this idea, you find it using the same rhetoric over and over again, whether it's defending the gold standard back in 1896 or NAFTA in 2016. Anti-populism always uses the same sentiments and draws the same stereotypes. It sometimes even speaks to us from the very same prestigious institutions. They're still around 100 years later. And its most toxic ingredient, this kind of highbrow contempt for ordinary Americans, is as poisonous today as it was in the 1890s or in the 1930s. Now, modern day thinkers who attack what they call populism, I did a whole lot of reading of their books and articles for this book, and I discovered that they only rarely bother to consider the movement that invented the word, the guys here in Kansas on that train from Kansas City. Far more frequently, they attach the word populist to, European politicians like the Le Pen family or to various South American demagogues. Some of the experts that I studied are unaware that the Populist Party of the 1890s even existed. They don't know who invented the word. So what these present day thinkers cannot escape, however, are the roots of their own anti-populist tradition. Whether or not they have ever heard of people like sockless Jerry Simpson, When they denounce populism, they are embracing a political practice that originally sprang up to stop radicals like him. Sockless Simpson, by the way, was a congressman from here in Kansas, very, very left-wing, really interesting guy. Anyhow, I want to wind up by going back to have a little history lesson. Let's go back to the 1890s, okay? 1896, a depression was in full effect. Discontent was everywhere you looked in America. There were huge strikes. Remember, the Pullman strike was in 1894. There was a march on Washington, the first ever, organized by populists, by the way. Everybody thought the class war was at hand. And then here comes 1896. The Democratic Party meets in its convention in Chicago. They toss overboard the sitting Democratic president at the time, Grover Cleveland, and they nominate instead William Jennings Bryan, a 36-year-old currency reformer from Nebraska with this kind of, extraordinary oratorical gift. And then a few weeks later, the Populist Party meets in their convention and they endorse him as well. Among the respectable, these events were the trigger for absolute hysteria. I mean, to the establishment, there was no doubt about what Bryan signified. One of the nation's main political parties, they could clearly see, had been captured by radicalism, and the shock was as great as that of a stock market crash. Now, as you and I know, Bryan was not really a populist, and he was certainly no radical, but his threat to the establishment was not imaginary. He wanted to take the country off the gold standard. And if he had done that, if he had succeeded in doing that, it would have seriously damaged, Wall Street interests, as well as merchants and bankers in every city and town in America. And so here comes the hysteria, right? Our system was coming unraveled, the respectables yelled, with society's worst elements lining up against its best. The class war began in earnest, only this time from the top down. So among the establishment in this country in 1896, consensus ruled. It became this ironclad thing, and journalists, academics, clergymen, millionaires, bankers, businessmen of every description, they all came together with the Republican Party to stave off the challenge that they perceived. And the word they used to summarize their hatred and their fear of Bryan was the same word we use today, populism. So in the book, I give the details of the establishment's incredible assault on Bryan and the means by which they put him down. And it included all of the usual 19th century electoral skullduggery, and also, these amazing political cartoons. And I went out and found them, Barbara, and I had them photographed and put them up on my website in full color. If you go to tcfrank.com, you can, don't click out of this meeting or anything, please, but go over to TC Frank and check out the anti-populist gallery. It is quite incredible the degree, the lengths to which their hysteria about Bryan took them. But what they were doing above all was building a stereotype around this word populism, okay? So these were reactionaries. These were very right-wing, very, very conservative people at the time. And what they said was that populism means exactly the same thing our intellectuals say it means today, mob rule. Populism means anarchy. Populism means a willful refusal to listen to experts, right? The economists who agreed on the gold standard. Populism is mental illness. Populism is a bid for dictatorship. But above all, populism, and this is what's so important, populism to them represents rule by a class of people who cannot be permitted to rule. I'm going to give one example, and then we'll wind this up. It was a pamphlet written by a famous novelist and man of letters named John Hay, famous back then, largely forgotten today. And the pamphlet was distributed to every corner of the nation by the Republican Party in this extraordinary campaign of 1896. The title of the pamphlet is The Platform of Anarchy. And if you go back and read it, it defames populism in exactly the way our modern pundits and political scientists defame populism. So John Hay had this whole theory of populism. He said populists value nothing. throwing their frantic challenge against every feature of our civilization. They appealed to the openly lawless. They waged a shameful insurrection against law and national honesty. For the plumed knights of the Republican Party, he wrote, it is as if a champion at a tourney, awaiting the onset of a chivalrous antagonist, should suddenly find himself attacked by a lunatic in rags. Right? That's the populist challenge. And everywhere you look that year in 1896, the respectable were facing off against the contemptible. It was that basic. It was that simple. Quality and taste were menaced by the rabble for no reason greater than the supposed resentment of lower animals for higher ones. And the stereotype endures. It goes on and on and on. The Populist Party has been forgotten, but the anti-populist backlash of 1896 lives on. It is still with us today. Indeed, it has become a form of respectable scholarly practice. I mean, this is how you get tenure. This is how you get prizes. This is how, you get invited to the great departments, right? What the elites said then, the elites say today as well. I mean, the avenue is slightly different. We absorb it from TED Talks and social media and so on. But anti-populism itself is a living fossil. It is this 19th century smear campaign that is somehow still going. So my object in the book is both to understand that long-running form of reaction and also to rescue from it our real American radical tradition, the one form of politics I think that has a real chance of undoing this nation's long right-wing turn.
I'm clapping. You left out one thing that's sort of jarring about when anti-populism today is it rests on the assumption that populism means racism.
Yeah.
That is, if you look, if you were to pay attention to the average, say, white truck driver or something, that you would really be horrified by some of the things he might say.
Yeah.
And that's the test. So it becomes they've kind of reversed the moral.
Yeah. Now it's an interesting question because populism in its day was famous for the opposite. In the South, this is now I don't want to go too far down this road because the populists were people of their time, but one of the things that they did that they were known for in their day that was extremely frightening to ruling class Southerners was they had this idea that poor white farmers should get together with poor black farmers and join forces, and in that way sort of enact their interests, do something to advance their economic interests. That was their stated position in the South. Now, they were never and this was famous, as I say, and there were many historians have written about this. They've made the populists, hey, there's my dad. They've made the populists into some of them have made the populists into heroes for this and this kind of thing. And I don't want to push that too far because I think it can be easily exaggerated. A lot of populists were racists, and in the movement, they never really did come together with black voters in any significant way. And they never really did achieve what they set out to win. But they did. One part of that story needs to be remembered, and that is that they scared the hell out of the white Southern ruling class, the Democratic Party at the time. And the Democratic Party came down on them like a ton of bricks in the most shocking and startling way imaginable. If you go back and read the history of this is when disenfranchisement begins. So in some states, the populists did succeed with this strategy, namely in North Carolina. Well, that was the only Southern state where they succeeded was North Carolina. And they managed to take over the government for a couple of years. And in response, the local Democratic Party, which was the party of white supremacy, they openly said that, by the way. That's not, reading between the lines or something. That's what they were about. they lashed back at the populists who had aligned themselves with the Republicans in the most incredible way. And they in 1898 they drummed up what they called the White Supremacy Campaign. This is really what they called it, the White Supremacy Campaign, and they in the most extraordinary sort of onslaught of race hate. And they deployed this against the populists and the Republicans, who, like I said, had come together in that state, and they beat them. And the first thing they did once they took the state back was disenfranchise Black people, take the vote away from Black voters and also from lots of poor whites. And the reason, and they were open about this, is this can never happen again. So that happened in state after state across the South, whether it was populism or just the threat of populism, or the threat of somebody doing something like populism, trying to unite poor whites with poor Blacks. And the Southern ruling class was like, no way, we're never letting that happen again. And that stood, the disenfranchisement stood up until what, 1964, 1965? It's a horrible, horrible story. But that's what's funny is that has been lost. The memory of that has been completely vanished. Now here in Kansas, populism was different. Kansas was an abolitionist state. It was founded by abolitionists, and a lot of abolitionists who remained alive in the 1890s signed up for the Populist Party. They thought it was the next step in the sort of great march of reform. In fact, one of the interesting fact, this is not in Kansas, but in Chicago, the man who wrote the 13th Amendment, the US Senator from Illinois who wrote the 13th Amendment, who is long retired by 1894, reemerged into public life as a populist. But that was, he didn't get very far. It died out pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, can we take the word back somehow? I mean, what are here?
I thought about that when I started writing this book. My wife said, she said, Tom, let it go. The word is gone. The word, you've lost the word. You loved these people, and they're your people, and they were great. And historians love populism. They write these books. Like, remember Larry Goodwin? Do you remember this guy? These wonderful romantic books about populism. And, this is the great missed opportunity in American history. This was our chance to have a labor party, and we blew it. They love populism. And I do too, but sometimes I think we just have to let the word go, but we can't let the tradition go. Okay. And we can't let our history be poisoned by what's going on now in intellectual circles. That can't be allowed to happen, in my opinion. But so that's why I did what I did in this book, which is to focus on the anti-populists, because it is the same year after year after year. And I found the most incredible examples of it, both in the 1890s and then again in the 1930s, when it comes back as this way of fighting Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. And they just said the most outrageous, incredible things. And these were very right-wing people, by the way, very reactionary people. I mean, they were esteemed members of society, lawyers and economists and industrialists of high standing. But their opinions were outrageous, often racist, eugenics, spouting the most awful, awful things. And that whole ideology of anti-populism, that whole philosophy has now shifted over to the centrists and even liberals. That's who uses the term in the way that I'm describing now. So it's a reactionary ideology that's been embraced by, our friends.
Yeah. Let's talk about some people who are more from our own, more people will remember because more of us were alive, say when Martin Luther King was alive then, well, Bernie Sanders, he'll outlive us all. We know that. But,
King is a character in the book, as you notice.
Yeah.
So King
Yeah,
had,
what do you want to say? I mean, these are populists, right?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
well, I don't know if he would have applied that term to himself, but King had interesting things to say about populism. If you go back and look at the famous speech that he gave at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march, it's sort of one of his greatest moments, 1965. By the way, he gave that speech in the week I was born. And but if you go back and watch the speech on YouTube, it's easy to find. And he has a whole passage in there where it's one of his all-time great sort of bits of oratory, but he talks about the populist movement and how it was beaten in the South, and he gets it exactly right. He doesn't, make all these mistakes like our modern day sort of political scientists do. King gets it exactly right, and then he draws this incredible parable from it. He talks about where Jim Crow came from and how the South invented Jim Crow as a way of suppressing populism. And so these poor white farmers who had signed up for the populist movement, it gave them Jim Crow as this really, can I curse on this? Is that allowed? Is this
Go ahead, Thomas.
okay? As this really shitty replacement for getting something real. Populism was like, let's go out there and let's change the system, and we can stop being poor, and we can finally get paid for our work, etc. And the Southern elite are like, no, we're going to give you this other thing, this really shitty thing, Jim Crow. And then King goes into this amazing thing where he says, and the poor white man, when he couldn't buy food, he ate Jim Crow.
Mhm.
And it's a beautiful metaphor. Anyhow, King had it exactly right. And there were all of these people watching him at that moment who went back to their typewriters and wrote about populism. And a lot of the movements in the 60s had a very populist strain to them. You look at SNCC, Students for Nonviolent, I'm sorry, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, extremely populist. It was all about empowering people at the grassroots, not the leaders. It was all about getting ordinary people to lead in their own communities in the fight to get voting rights for Black people in the South. The 60s had a very populist side to it, and King himself wanted to move from, campaigning for civil rights to campaigning for economic rights. In fact, he was working on that when he was assassinated.
Mhm. This is the closest thing I'll come to a critical comment. Are you ready? I think you don't give enough space to the feminist contribution to populism. And of course, I have to say that because
but I do.
yeah.
No,
I
try. At least I tried. I mean, I should have done more.
You could have asked me.
So Barbara, when you're writing a book like this, you're very constrained for space, and you're trying to tell a story, and it's almost like writing a telegram.
That's why I'm taking this time to point out.
But let me go down that road for just a second here. So populism was singularly identified with women, with women's rights at the time. It was the only major party of its day to have women.
Also, just in the realm of theory and thought, feminists took on the experts in the 19th century and the early 20th century. They had to, because the arguments against women's safe voting were, like our uteruses do our thinking for us.
Yeah. Well, populists were they were the ones that, they were, most of them anyway, were in favor of women's suffrage. They actually managed to achieve it in the states of Colorado and Idaho, which were some of the earliest states to get women's suffrage. Here in Kansas, the sort of maximum leader of the populist revolt was a woman. I'm sure you remember this story, Mary Elizabeth Lees, whose famous saying was, "You farmers need to raise less corn and more hell." She was a real spellbinder. And in my research, there was another famous female populist leader here in Kansas who was more of a sort of executive type, behind the scenes. And I came across an editorial. One of the great things about doing the research for this book, Barbara, is thanks to the internet, you can now read old newspapers very, very easily. And when I was in graduate school, that was not easy to do. You had to get the microfilms and go through it and all this. You can do text searches now in old newspapers. And it's not perfect, but you can find amazing things. And I found this editorial denouncing this woman in the Populist Party in Kansas, calling her the first woman boss in American politics. And they made up
What?
boss, like a political boss, like Tom Pendergast or something like that. They called her she wasn't a boss at all. She was just like the, executive secretary or something like that. But that's what they called her. And they made up sort of mean nicknames for her. They wanted to call her a bossarina or something like that. It's ridiculous, but it's one of these fascinating little things that you find when you dig in that history. They also wrote populist novels and, anyhow, yeah, the story.
Uh-huh.
By the way, something else I would like to talk about, but I don't want to get in the way of our viewers. I know they want to join in here, is the populism's battle with expertise, because this is really the crux of what it comes down to today. And populism, they loved science, the sort of populist rank and file. They would read, these sort of scientific farm magazines, and they would go to, they were very supportive of agricultural colleges and this kind of thing, and advanced techniques in farming and that sort of thing. But at the same time, they despised economic orthodoxy. Because that was, the gold standard, austerity, that was this sort of, I don't know if you know any economists, Barbara, but this kind of contemptuous attitude that they had then. A lot of them are different today, but a lot of them aren't. This contemptuous attitude that they had towards ordinary people. That was, and the economic thinking of the day was like, it's hard times, but, so what? Suck it up. It's we don't care. That's what the government was supposed to follow was the sayings, the needs of the banks and the business community. The government had nothing to do with the needs of the people. And you've got these amazing sort of academics of the period, like William Graham Sumner, denouncing people who are having difficulties in hard times. They need to shut up. They need to stop complaining. They need to learn their place. And I came across one amazing essay by a economist from the University of Chicago, my alma mater, and he's denouncing populism. That word, populists, like calling them crazy, talking about like, what are they doing complaining about hard times? So what if times are hard? Sometimes they're hard, sometimes they aren't. Big deal. Suck it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. You probably get some very angry responses. I mean, because some of the kinds of evil things you're saying from an anti-populist point of view, you've been saying for a long time in one way or another.
Yeah.
I would say I've been saying them too.
Yes, you and I think almost exactly alike. It's one of the
And I really want to get at what inspired you. There you were, a graduate student at the University of Chicago. You could have gone into finance. You could have gone into all kinds of things. What made you decide to become a member of this kind of hated minority or, stigmatized?
Oh man. It's a long story, Barbara. And I don't really know when to begin. I don't even know how to answer it. I mean, it's a really great question, but suffice it to say, I studied history and came out with my PhD in the middle of what is now looks like a permanent jobs crisis for humanities PhDs. That was brand new when I got my PhD. And so I went and worked as an adjunct and it sucked. It was, you worked really, really hard and you got paid very, very little, and it was not pleasant. And this is going to make you laugh, but I gave up on academia after a short period of working as an adjunct. I gave up on academia for journalism because the money was better. I know, out of the frying pan into the fire, and now they both self-destructed. Both the by chosen fields. But why did I sign up with the left? Oh, it's a lot of it was self-interest back then. I like a lot of the kids today. It was hard times for people in my particular position, but also a lot of it is just looking around the south side of Chicago, looking around at the people I grew up with here in Kansas City, and watching their lives be destroyed. I don't know if nobody's traveling anywhere during, our COVID, but you go to these small towns in Kansas and Missouri, which I remember from my high school days as being like out of this sort of Frank Capra dream, these wonderful places, and they are in ruins. And that's, it's a horrible thing to behold. And I can't stand seeing that happening to the people that I grew up with and the people that I identify with. So there's that aspect to it as well. Now we should let the voice of the Vox Populi be heard here, don't you think?
Of the people.
Yes.
The people, yes. The people who are participating in this.
People, yes. I'll read some audience questions.
Okay.
Great. So Carrie says, I've been thinking about you so much during the pandemic, Mr. Frank, and she's thankful that PNP is hosting. So great. Thank you, Carrie. So in Listen Liberal, your argument is that technocrats, experts are ruining the Democratic Party, yet politicians that listen to technocrats and experts, to me, is the difference between effective and ineffective leaders in this moment. Does Listen Liberal apply in COVID times?
Yes. So Barbara and I actually talked about this a lot at the time when I was writing Listen Liberal. So I'm not anti-learning and I'm not anti-expertise. What I don't like and have never liked is elitism. And so I've thought about this question a lot ever since COVID began. And believe me, I am as angry as everybody else at the the response to this from Washington, which is no response. It's the worst leadership I've seen in my lifetime. I mean, this is sub George W. Bush levels. And it's out here in Kansas where I am right now. The virus is now running wild, as today's Kansas City Star informed us. It's completely out of control. And it is terrifying and it makes me furious. And yes, we should be wearing masks. And yes, we should be listening to medical experts, but that doesn't mean that expertise should be privileged over. So the whole message of populism was not that you don't listen to doctors or that you.
Populism puts a different perspective on expertise. I'll just mention, one populist organizer who we both know in Indiana, Tom Lewandowski, who he's come up with a get back to work plan for all Americans who may need jobs right now. And his plan is to have every workplace inspected by its own workers who have to approve its safety before anybody returns to work. Because why? Because they know what to look for. They are the experts. So
that's exactly right. And so, and what Barbara's getting at is the one other way to put it is the democratization of expertise. And the populists talked about this all the time. It wasn't to just blindly to set up a ruling class and do whatever they say. It's to have them explain it to us, and then we become a kind of. This is, by the way, this is how the book ends with this. There's this pamphlet series published out of out of Kansas, actually, called the Little Blue Books. This is the guy that sort of very populist publishing empire. He sort of invented the paperback. And the idea was to disseminate knowledge far and wide, to have a sort of a priesthood of everyone, you know, an expert class of everyone. And I think a lot about this during this time of COVID. And I say to myself, let's sort of flip the question on its head. Ask yourself this. What would a populist healthcare system look like? And there were all sorts of, you know, in populist times, healthcare wasn't a big deal. I mean, it wasn't a reform issue because it wasn't insanely expensive at the time. But later on, it became so. And there were all of these sort of neo-populist efforts to reform healthcare in the 20s and 30s and up into the 1940s. And so we know what populist healthcare would look like. And you know what the answer is? Well, can I tell you an anecdote? Do you want to hear it? Okay. When populism, it took me a while to look this up. It's quite an incredible story. Populism died, the Populist Party died in the late 1890s in America, but it continued on in Canada, in the Plains provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, right? And one of the parties that eventually got set up there by sort of neo-populists, the populists had this idea of utopia. Their phrase for it was the cooperative commonwealth. And there's this party in Saskatchewan called the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. And they were straight up populists, right out of the American model. And they finally took over the government in Saskatchewan in the 40s. And you know what they did? You know what they set up? What the Canadians call Medicare. They were the first ones to do it. Set up the single payer healthcare system, first one in North America. And now they have it all over Canada. That's populism in action. And I can't help but think as we go through this awful epidemic, damn, why don't we have that now? That's exactly what we need. You know, people are afraid to go to the hospital because they're going to be bankrupted. The hospitals themselves are way too small because they're run on a for-profit basis. When we finally do get the vaccine or the treatment, it's going to be expensive. It drives me crazy. You know, a populist healthcare system would bring everyone in. It wouldn't be about, you know, listen to the experts in Washington, D.C. It would be about all of us are in charge of this. Anyhow, I think about this all the time. I blab too much. I am so sorry. I just talk and talk and talk.
But we like to listen to you.
Yeah. There's this question from Elise about the US Postal System. She says, hello, Thomas and Barbara, huge fan of you both. Could you discuss the US Postal System a bit as a sort of tragedy of the commons? It has a 91% popularity rating among the public, written into our founding documents. Despite its popularity and history, do you see the US public as being tired and cowed enough to let it go? She's the wife of a letter carrier for the USPS.
Great question. The populists loved the Postal Service. By the way, one of the few things they got a lot of things enacted in their course of their life, but one of them was the first ones was rural free delivery. That was a populist invention. And they loved the idea of postal savings banks. They wanted to set up postal savings banks in order to put, you know, ordinary banks out of business. You know, they had all of these schemes, right? But they loved the post office, and they were like, well, let's have the government take over the railroads and run them the way it runs the post office. And, you know, the post office used to be run very, very well. It was something of a model, and it has been under attack for decades by, the sort of forces of the right, these people who believe in the market above all else, who sense and understand that the post office is, you know, the nose of the camel, right? It's that is socialism. And if that works, then, oh no, you know, people might try to apply that principle to something else. And I hate the way the Postal Service has been attacked. By the way, that also goes back to my childhood. I was a big stamp collector when I was a boy, of course, right?
Okay, you established your credentials. Yeah. What next for you, Tom?
What next? But this is, by the
Well,
way, this is
you're an author. You're on the road as much.
So there's no book tours during COVID.
No book tours. I know, but intellectually, what are you going to do? Have you thought of running for office, for example?
Oh no, Barbara, I wouldn't do that. I almost hate to bring it up, but I'm pretty determined that this is my last book about politics. I'm so disgusted, and I'm so done with it. And I feel like I've been fighting this for, you remember when I wrote One Market Under God? Yeah, I know you wrote that. You read that book. That was in the year 2000. And when I wrote the one before that, The Conquest of Cool in 1997, I was, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I thought we could change the world. And one of the things about populism, by the way, when you go back and read their literature, when you dig in their newspapers and read their books, they were very optimistic people. And I was like that myself back in those days, in the 90s and the early aughts. And I feel like that has left me. And I'm not trying to be depressing here. This is a good book, and I'm really proud of it. I worked hard on it. I uncovered a lot of things that I think it's excellent. I think it's one of my best things I've ever done. But
absolutely,
I need a break, and I need to get away from politics. I'm so utterly disgusted with where we are right now in this country, and I only see it getting worse. I mean, I think Trump might lose this fall. Don't get me wrong. I think Joe Biden might beat him. There's every sign. I mean, I don't see how you bungle an epidemic like this and get reelected. I don't see how that's possible. You got 15% unemployment. He's not going to get reelected if these things continue. And but even so, it's not clear to me that the Democrats have learned any lesson from this. And it's not clear to me that the Republicans are going to go back and say, okay, we're sorry. We're never going to pull that stuff again. The 2016, they're going to continue down the same road. This is going to go on and on and on. And my great fear is that one side or the other is finally going to discover the weapon that they used against the populists in the 1890s, which is disenfranchisement. And I want nothing to do with this. I'm so disgusted by it, by what's happening. But anyhow, that's my story. And I got a big bottle of the short term. There's a big bottle of scotch over there, and that's where I'm going. So
yeah, no, you got it. We're depending on you to keep understanding and explaining things.
Well, that's nice of you, Barbara. But
this book is fun to read too. I always grit my teeth when I have to read a book that I have to read for some reason. And then sometimes I forget why I'm reading it. I just keep reading it. And I think everybody who's participating now will have the same response.
Good. I'm glad.
It's very, very.
It also is my first book ever to have color illustrations, by the way, which are
illustrations.
They're very fun. They're very fun. So I got not only the cartoons from the 1890s, but I went and got these anti-Roosevelt cartoons from the 1930s, which are hysterical. They're from the Chicago Tribune, which in the 1930s was on this incredible anti-New Deal vendetta, the just monomaniacal war on Franklin Roosevelt. And then I have a bunch of cartoons from our own time, sort of using the anti-populist motif. And the motif is exactly this, or very similar, I should say. It evolves, but it's the same motif in the 1890s, the 1930s, and then in the present day. And at all times, you know what anti-populism misses? What it leaves out, as though this was impossible, an impossibility, is elite failure. This whole concept that elites might be wrong, that elites might screw things up, that when you put, experts as a class in charge of everything, and there's no accountability for them except for peer review. And by the way, in the peers, they all love each other. They do things like bail each other out. They bail out the Wall Street banks. They do all sorts of stupid things. They enact these trade agreements that are really good for them and really terrible for everybody else. They act as a class. This was the great insight of Listen Liberal, that when you set up when you decide that you're a party of the professional class, which is what the Democrats have more or less openly done, that the professional class, like any other class, has a self-interest and will act on that self-interest. They're not just, neutral, arbiters or something like that.
A lot of trouble on the left.
I know, but nobody gets this. This is knowledge that our brains are like.
Complete heresy to say what you just said. I know, because
You can't say it, or well, you can say it. You can say it, but it's like a concept that cannot be absorbed. People cannot get it. Anyhow.
So you got to be out there saying it, Tom.
Oh no, I'm done. I said it, Barbara. I said it. I did my best, my friend.
Keep it.
I've got other projects. I want to write. Well, I have many things I want to write, but I often feel bad that I don't know if you remember, my first book was about the advertising industry in the 1960s and about what they called the creative revolution. And I could have gone in so many directions with that. And I wound up going in this political direction, but I want to go back to some of the directions that I didn't, some of the roads not taken back then. I mean, I had so many good ideas when I was young, and I want to go back and explore some of them a little bit. So.
Well, I am eager to see the next thing. Everybody should read this book. Give this book, well, it's 4th of July is over, but Labor
But it's
Day.
great. Wait, the thing is that it's really good pandemic reading. I mean, as you said, it goes down easy. You can easily do it in not maybe one sitting, 2 days easy. And I've got all these funny illustrations on my website and supporting material that you can read. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tom, for doing it. And I think it's going to maybe make a tiny difference. I mean,
That's so nice of you, Barbara.
And it's terrible to have a book coming out at this moment.
I know, yeah.
But this book should get past the virus.
Our COVID, yeah. I wrote it. I didn't even think about anything like that when I was writing it. I went out and I got, well, we don't want to talk about it, but I was all set for the book tour to end all book tours. I'm extremely healthy. I've been working out, I was ready to go. And then this happened. But, all things told, I'm proud of it. And I think it's a book that'll last, but we shall see.
Well, you should be proud. Are you trying to...
Beth, do we have anything else? Any other questions?
So we have a lot of questions, but we're running low on time. The conversation between you two has just been too good. I'm going to save the questions, Thomas, if you maybe want to answer them on Twitter or something.
I really dislike Twitter. I go on it about once a day and look at it, and then I'm just disgusted and I leave. But I do Facebook all the time.
Okay, great.
And also people. I do email. I'm very old. I do email, and people can write to me on my website, and I am happy to talk about anything with people. I got nothing else to do. I'm just sitting here in Kansas City,
All right. Okay, well, I'll get the rest of these questions to you because they're good. They're really, we have a smart crowd this evening.
Excellent, as you always do. And by the way, I should say I really miss doing the event in your usual space. I love Politics and Prose, and I hope so much that this epidemic doesn't inflict disaster on the independent bookstores. It's been so hard for you guys over the years, and it's like you guys are a national treasure. And
thank you.
I hope you guys come out of this all right.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. And we also really appreciate our viewers tonight for tuning in on Zoom and on YouTube Live. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for working with me earlier this evening. Everybody, the link is in the chat to the People Know. You'll also get an email later tonight with that link, as well as the link to Barbara's latest book, Had I Known, which is also a great read. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope you stay well and stay well read. Good night, everybody.
All right. Thank you
Night,
so
Barbara.
much.
Night, Thomas.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.